Hi, welcome to week 1 of Conflict Utilization. Chris Tenny-Brittian, really great to be with you for this first week. Well, this week is our general introduction, so we're going to talk a little bit about conflict this week, about how to identify it, how to recognize it. We're going to talk about the different levels, intensities of conflict. These are really important pieces. It was said to me a long, long time ago, every congregation has conflict. When George Bullard came out with his book, one of our required readings, Every Congregation Needs a Little Conflict, I was like, yes, but on George. If you don't have conflict in your church, you're either not doing anything or you're in denial. And I'm hoping that what you see is really going to bring that home. Conflict, not all conflict is bad. Part of our problem is that for many of us, conflict hits us in the gut, or it goes so deeply, and so we put up our walls. Unfortunately, a real negative that's connected with that is that you have your wall up there and you can't see the possibilities. And another piece with that is that you will avoid conflict, you'll avoid talking to people, you'll avoid just communication and conversation with people because it's difficult, but all of the stuff inside you just builds up and builds up and builds up until it bursts out. So that's a lot of why we don't want to talk about conflict. We want to do everything we can to avoid conflict. We're going to talk about that in coming weeks, though. So this week, I want us to look at again what conflict looks like, to be honest about that, to talk about where we see conflict in our congregations. Remember, you cannot answer the questions until you read the readings. It looks like there's a lot of reading to do, but quite honestly, I mean, if you look at Antagonists in the Church, which, by the way, is one of the first books I received about conflict, big writing. If you look at George Bullard's, it may look like there are a lot of pages. The writing isn't as big, but there are a lot of pauses in his work. And there's a chart in there that we're going to be looking at this week. There are these questions, these personal reflections. You don't have to do that. In fact, I would suggest during this course that you not do the personal reflections yet. You'll have the opportunity to do reflecting on the forums. But let's make it through the book and then go back and work the book, preferably with your congregation in some way or another. Conflict. People smell conflict. When people come to your church and you have a conflictual congregation, a higher intensity of conflict in your church, people will know it's there. And the people who stick around in those situations are the ones who are drawn and feed off of conflict. Those who have a need to fix things is another grouping, and those that have Jesus complexes. It's a different form of that needing to be needed. It's those people who come in and think they can fix anything and see your church as an opportunity to be Jesus. You may not want to hear that. That may be really bothersome, but it's just the way it is. So there's that one. Time bombs. I wrote this out of my doctoral studies. I started into my doctoral work in a course of study called multiplication, church multiplication. I thought it was just about a church starting another church, and then what I found out was it was about churches starting churches that start churches that start churches. And at that time, the denomination I'm in, the Disciples of Christ, had this new way of looking at church planting. It had been that if you wanted to plant a church, they were going to give you money, and that was going to be great, and you could buy a building, but the problem was that those churches, weren't getting off the ground. They were bad investments. That they failed because a high percentage of churches never make it off the ground, and we'd invested monies and used up monies, and there wasn't any more money to plant new churches, or what monies were very, very minuscule. So at that point, this is going to be in the late 1990s. There's this whole push now for churches to be starting churches, to send people out. Some people out to take your congregation and move your congregation out. There's all kinds of ways to start churches. And so that's then where that focus came. And I was called to the Bellevue Christian Church. And what I said in my calling there as senior minister was, we're going to be a church to plant a church. And so within the next 3 years, we're going to start a new church, 2 or 3 years. Anyways, what I found out was that the church was so conflictual, there was no way that we were going to be able to start a healthy church. And we have so few healthy churches in so many of our mainline denominations that to say we need to be churches to be starting churches, so many of them decide to start churches because of conflict, and you carry conflict from one church into another church, and conflictual people to churches to be conflictual in other churches. So I switched over my focus in my doctoral work from church planting and multiplication systems to looking at transitioning churches, to making churches, helping churches to become healthy churches. Today, I use the language that looking at churches, helping churches to be sustainable and effective, right? We want churches that are effective and that can sustain that effectiveness and can affect sustainability. Conflict is that key piece that we have to address. Let me say one more thing, because we're going to be starting reading too in Antagonists in the Church. Key part there about antagonists. I know that at least one of you, well, some of you, I won't say at least one of you because I don't want you to think I'm pointing at you, but some of us hate the title of this book. When I've used it with leaders in churches, they push against. They say, oh, you shouldn't do name calling. Saying antagonists in the church is the same as saying, oh, you're a bully. Not that you're bullying, but you're a bully. You see the name calling, the finger pointing. But there are antagonists in the church. There are, and we need to just call it out the way it is. Okay, I'm not saying you're an antagonist, but I'm saying there are antagonists in the church. We're never going to call them that. We're never going to, we're just never going to call them that. But we need to be real about this. This book was handed to me early in my solo ministry, and it changed my life and the way I was pastoring. A word about all of that. I came into ministry in Georgia. I say I was a golden child. I might say today I was a silver child, though I wasn't silver then, but I was a golden child, quite bottom line. And I had incredible mentors and disciplers and pastors, and was given so many opportunities. And I went to my first solo pastorate that was this incredibly fragmented and broken church, and I had no idea. And I had no idea what to do in that. Two of the best things that happened there, one is that I went and took a conflict class at St. Paul Seminary, conflict in the rural church, and then the other part of that was that I got a spiritual director and learned about self-care. So that changed the way I was able to address conflict, and then it turns out I just found myself in those places. And then in denominational ministry, in which I've been in now for well over a decade, and doing coaching and consulting with ministers and churches, conflict is the number one reason that churches fail and that churches are unsustainable and ineffective. And so I have this part of me, this dedication in me to helping raise healthy pastors, helping to support healthy pastors, to help you use and then to shift the tide of conflict. Well, that's my introduction for this week. I, again, look forward to seeing you on the boards and to seeing what I get to learn and what we get to teach each other. Have a great week. See you in a few hours. Bye-bye.